Hey everybody, I'm Ken Yeung. I am a reporter for VentureBeat. I cover all things social and technology in San Francisco and the Bay Area. And I guess let's go down the line and have everybody, I guess Megan's already done the introductions for herself, but Ryan and Eric, if you want to go ahead and spend a few seconds and tell people.
I don't think I actually introduced myself.
Oh,
I'm Megan. I'm a general partner at Spark Capital. I focus on growth stage companies, so B, C's, D's. I'm the second general partner on that fund. Spark is a 10-year history on the venture side, relatively new on the growth side.
Hey everyone, Ryan Sarver, Redpoint Ventures partner, doing kind of early stage and some growth. Previously to this, was at Twitter for about a little over 4 years, and now 2.5 years into venture.
Eric Feng. I'm a partner at Kleiner Perkins, focusing on early stage consumer companies, and I actually had the distinct pleasure of getting to work with Megan for a little bit when she was there as well.
Cool. So today's topic is we're talking about social platforms and how do you monetize, and is there actually any still interest in the VC community for these type of things? So I want to open up with the first question is, what are you guys seeing in terms of new startups in the social space? Is there still room for it after we're spending most of our time on Facebook, where Twitter, LinkedIn, those type of things? What are you seeing in terms of the quality of companies that are pitching you guys right now?
I'll lead this off from the growth perspective. So from new startups, this is a bit later on, but frankly, we've invested in 2 social platforms in the last 60 days that haven't been announced. So clearly, from a growth perspective, there are still some very interesting investment opportunities from the perspective of social platforms. But I'll leave it to these guys to talk about what they're seeing at the earlier stage.
Yeah, I think earlier stage, everyone's seen trends, and Mary Meeker's slides, I think, illuminate it well. Mobile distribution's getting harder. Concentration or attention is aggregating around the kind of top few apps: Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram. And so generally, when we think of like social early stage, I think in Redpoint specifically, we'll probably be going later stage and looking for ones that kind of have breakout traction, because we think distribution is becoming increasingly harder. And so we generally are looking later and later at stages. I think the quality of companies is still interesting. It's just very hard to predict and very hard to know if they're going to be able to get kind of breakout traction. So we wait till later.
Yeah, the biggest problem that we're seeing is that as the current innovation wave, which is largely built on mobile, is starting to mature, these platforms are maturing, and it's really hard to create new innovative solutions on them. We say that it's harder to create better enough, because the bar for good enough is now very, very high. So that's been one of the struggles, in that all of the low-hanging problems are largely solved, and it's just hard to figure out interesting new problems to solve at a sufficient, better enough scale. So not to say that that can't be done, but I think the bar is much higher than we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, I'll give Eric a little bit of a shout out here, because of the real kingmakers in the social space to date. LinkedIn, which certainly has had some news recently, I think is really ripe for reimagining and reinventing. And Eric led an investment in a company for Kleiner called Handshake, which is really reimagining, as I will say it, I'm going to pitch it on your behalf, the LinkedIn for the next generation. Because as I've observed, the next generation is not signing up for LinkedIn with the same cadence and velocity that we did. It's an application and a product that feels very old school, doesn't really feel integrated into mobile to the extent that that generation is very focused and connected as it relates to their workplace. And so, we are definitely looking at, on the growth stage side, one of these companies to break out and break through on the professional network, professional social side, and Handshake certainly seems like a very interesting company from that perspective.
So Ryan, I wanted to dive deeper into this notion about you're kind of waiting to see if a company has any traction. Like, what are some indications to you that besides waiting for seeing if anybody else kind of picks up on investing in a company, what other signs would signal that this is a company that you would probably want to invest in?
I think there's 2 different ways to think about it. One is to try and understand, is it a new audience, is it a new behavior, is it a new platform? So are these kind of new opportunities or pockets to open up, like Megan's talking about? This audience of people are no longer signing up for LinkedIn, but it's obviously a really important network. So where is the next chance of building that? Those are interesting. So you think from a thematic point, where are these things happening? when we dig into metrics, we look at a lot of kind of retention curves and engagement, and make sure that you're not seeing people churn out after kind of 30 or 60 days. You're having like long-term consistent engagement. I'd be happier to see kind of flat but lower engagement, or sorry, lower retention over time, and knowing that you can improve that, than something that just consistently declines over time.
And in what areas are there, and this is kind of also a question for Eric, Eric was talking about the mobile space is kind of becoming quite saturated. What's the next big area? I mean, are we looking at, with Facebook and Line and Slack, all, kind of really propelling us forward into the bot space? Are we kind of going to see more investments into that as it pertains to social? What about when it comes to virtual reality and the likes?
So I'll start off by saying I completely agree with Ryan about the importance of engagement, and that's the number one metric we look at. It's not top line growth anymore, it's engagement. What's your D2, what's your D30? Day 2 retention, day 30 retention. Those are the hallmarks of indicators of potential long-lasting success. So couldn't agree with you more. In terms of what platforms that we're looking at, it's really interesting. I think that there's very little consistency actually in terms of what are the next exciting emerging platforms when you talk to different investors. I equate it to 5-6 years ago, everyone was fishing in the photo sharing, messaging, smart mobile app phone pool. Everyone is just fishing in that pool from the investment standpoint, and that's where all the fish were. But now you've got certain investors really fishing in the VR, AR pool, some doing ambient computing, some doing chat interfaces, others doing auto as a platform. So I think that this lack of consistency actually makes our job really exciting right now, because no one really knows if they're right, and we all get to come up with interesting new theses and test them, and then we wait for Megan to tell us if it was correct or not. So that's all we're doing right now.
I mean, I think what's really interesting on the growth side, again, just speaking from that perspective, is vertical social networks. So we recently led a round of investment in Medium, which is a publishing platform, but is also a social network built around long-form content. And so which bucket do you put it in? To the question that we had discussed even before this panel, is there even a social vertical anymore, or is social just a part of everything? We really look at these verticals where social engagement is key to the growth of the product, not just retention, but also growth over time. Whether or not the core product is pure social, which it isn't necessarily in the case of Medium, it's about long-form content, but social is the driver. Social is the accelerant of that product. And that's definitely true of a number of other companies we've looked at.
So do you guys, Megan, you were talking about, the Eric's investment in Handshake, and that kind of opened up a thought in my mind about the expansion into other verticals. Will we start to see more investments in specialized areas? So more professional, with LinkedIn getting acquired by Microsoft, and now you're going to see, there's one that I covered, startup I covered called 500 Mile. You have Handshake. All of these kind of really niche social networks, kind of chipping away at the likes of these big social networks. Are we going to start to see more of these come out of the woodwork and kind of really take away from these companies' market shares? For example, can Facebook be too big? And at which point do we start to see smaller niche social networks, kind of like when blogs were like, you had social networks for different communities? Are we going to start to see a revival of that?
I don't know if you call them small or niche. I think there's just the online audience has gotten so big now that you can have these kind of what I'd maybe think of more as specialized networks, or Megan was calling it verticalized. We're in one called Nextdoor, maybe with everyone here. Where it's about your local area, right? And it's a very differentiated network that doesn't exist. I think Facebook has lit up and created this kind of, this is your entire audience of friends, but they're much more specialized facets of everyone's life that have these important networks can be built and commercialized. And so I think you'll see some of those, whether it's university or local or some other profession that you're in. I do think we'll see more of those, but I don't think of them as small or niche because the audience can just be still so big for them.
Another big trend that we're super excited by is consumption behavior is changing because of the millennial demographic, something that my partner Mary Meeker put in her Internet Trends report. But millennials are not only the largest demo in the US, but they're actually the largest demo in our workforce. So it's a large population that actually now has buying power. And because of that, I think every brand is up for grabs in terms of, do you go to Lens Crafters, or do you go to Warby Parker? Do you go to mattress discounters, or do you go to Casper? Do you go to traditional cable company like Comcast, or do you go to Netflix and Hulu and over-the-top services? And I think that it's not just a law of large numbers anymore. It's actually large numbers with buying power, and that's going to lead to a lot of new behaviors.
But I do think you're correct that there are definitely some social platforms that have built themselves to be extremely dominant forces. So that's Facebook, that's Snapchat. Snapchat looks more like TV. To some extent, that's Twitter, maybe depending. But there's
Twitter
definitely
went downhill when Ryan left.
I was trying to be kind to my fellow panelists here. Instagram, which just released some amazing metrics today. Like there are certainly these enormous platforms, pillars that are turning into conduits for other social mechanisms, be it bots or whatever happens with VR. But at the same time, like I think that there's an opportunity for some of these more verticalized social networks to emerge. Whether or not they look like Facebook doesn't really matter to me. They might end up being bots-only products and services unto themselves. But I think that the mobile opportunity for millennials is really around creating groups of people around different interests and subject matters.
So speaking of Snapchat, why do all startups kind of want to be Snapchat now? I mean, would you invest in companies that are kind of mimicking that model?
No.
No.
Unless Evan is starting them again.
Yeah, I think we come back to this idea that we're always looking for the new motivation or behavior that's happening, and they created a new one that I don't think any of us necessarily predicted at the time, but as you play it back, you're like, everyone is getting these durable, permanent content sharing, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And there was obviously this new opportunity, especially for the millennial audience, where they didn't want content to live around forever and be part of their identity. And so it makes a lot of sense when you look back at it, but they kind of own that behavior now, and trying to steal that away from the existing platforms is incredibly hard. Right. And so we're always looking for new potential behaviors, but I don't think that's one that we would ever invest in.
Yeah, and this current crop of dominant companies, Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, Google, I think they're some of the strongest incumbents that tech has ever seen in the history of this industry. They are so good. It's just so hard to imagine a small company really sneaking up on them now. So I think it would take either a completely new emergent behavior or a brand new platform for that to happen.
So a lot of these companies are, I think years ago, these companies kind of stood out on their own in terms of not built upon a single platform. But now with the domination of Facebook, a lot of companies are being built on top of that. Like, are you, what's the investment thought behind that? I mean, will you be continuing to invest in apps that are built on top of Facebook, or is there some hope for those that don't have that type of network effect?
I think this is a really interesting thought experiment and something that we spend a fair amount of time talking about, even on the growth stage, since it's still an early dynamic, which was when the internet came to be. You took all of these offline experiences and you moved them into websites. And then you had the launch of iOS and the launch of Android, and frankly, the opening up of iOS, and all those website experiences became apps. And I think we're now in this third wave where you have some of these extremely dominant mobile apps that have in turn turned into platforms. And so now you have the launch of products and services as bots or some other manifestation on top of one of these platforms. So we're sort of 3 orders degree in. People forget that when iOS first opened up their platform to third-party development, for at least the first 18 months or so, people didn't think that a sustainable big business could be built as an app developer. And then it took a couple years, and now you have the largest startup of all time, Uber, which has only ever existed as an app. And I think that we are going to see the same sort of behavior on top of these apps themselves. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily think that the very first bot company or the very first provide me anything I want over Facebook Messenger or whatnot is going to be a huge business, but I think we're going to see a maturation of these platforms that enables a third party to develop on top of them and become a really, really interesting company.
I think the user numbers in messaging, I think of bots slightly different because it's getting a little overused in terms of like AI and NLP, but if you think of Messenger as a platform to deliver users, the reach they have is staggering today. And I think what Megan's also saying is these businesses will flow to where the users and attention are and where you can get access to them, and the kind of lowest point of friction for delivery. And messaging, I think, is really interesting from that way. You're not installing an app. You're adding an account, a user, and suddenly you can engage in a service. Now I think trying to figure out like NLP or language versus GUI is going to be a little interesting, but I think there's great new opportunities there for some from big companies.
There will be a huge company that is built on WeChat or Facebook Messenger alone. Like, it's not going to be tomorrow, but there will be an enormous company that is built on one of these messaging
And
platforms alone.
potentially growing faster than an Uber. Right?
Definitely.
Distribution's faster.
So we have 3 minutes. We have time for probably a couple of questions. Anybody? Nope.
They really want the drinks.
I know. Sorry, guys. Oh. What will that company do?
Robots that serve drinks.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think what's interesting, I'm not an early stage investor anymore, so I just get to pontificate about what these guys do. But I would guess that it's some sort of product or service that requires an intense amount of human interaction in real life or a lot of research. Something that can be streamlined into a single back and forth with a person or entity. That takes away the necessity, and I'm just going to drop like a note here around travel, for example, where the average American looks at something like 14 websites before booking a vacation and can condense that into one very simple interactive conversation through messaging. That's just a guess. Like, that's their job to prognose, but like that would be the sort of example I would have.
Yeah. Sorry, go.
Essentially media companies, startups on it, unless there's something I'm missing otherwise. But
Yeah, it's right now it's predominantly just media companies that are building on top of Snapchat. But you want to tackle
it's
it?
Large usage, tons of engagement, new medium, important audience, and growing and spending a lot of money. So, as a media company, I think it's an interesting channel to go to. We personally don't do a lot of investing in media companies, but for investors that think about that space, it's an interesting medium.
But I think you're potentially forecasting that they're going to have a broader platform play and allow commerce and games and other things that go through the Snapchat ecosystem. Seems logical that they'll go in that direction. If they do so, it's going to be a really tremendous opportunity. I'll just say one thing, and it's I hope a very optimistic message, which is that again, there are these different theses around what could be the next great platform that companies will emerge from, whether it's chat, whether it's messaging, or AI or VR. I will say that there is consensus, there's not consensus on which one is going to be the next big one, but there is consensus that something great will emerge from all of those, and it's just a matter of timing. So it's not if, it's when, and that's pretty cool in that all of these things are going to do remarkable benefits to the world, and there's going to be great companies emerge from all of them, and it's up to us to figure out the timing.
I think the other last point I'd add is if you look back to the history of the internet, whether it's from AOL to IM to MySpace to Facebook, and now on mobile, there's always been interesting social platforms, social companies that built on each of those platforms. And so people always ask, like, should you stop investing in social? It's like, no, you have to always stay investing in social. The question is more about when and which way will it start to emerge, but we're always looking. I think you just go through these ebbs and flows of when it's a little bit easier and a little more interesting and new opportunities versus when it's a little bit harder.
Cool. Well, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you, Megan. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.